different than going through a long trial, and Paul can probably attest to this, spending thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on attorney's fees.
Right.
Which is one of the other questions I was going to ask. We've talked in the past about what kinds of fees could be incurred by lawyers, with lawyers. What about working with you? Range. I'm not going to pin you down, but just a range.
Pin him down.
It varies. I mean, usually if it's something
That's
where...
an answer from a lawyer.
Yes.
That sounds like an answer a lawyer would give.
I'll quantify it.
The gray area.
You're in the right place to do it.
If it's very simple, it can be, I'll do it as an hourly type of program. If Jackie or David came in and said, okay, this is what we've got, and I determine it's just, I'm going to do an analysis with, a few different alternative projections on different scenarios, I'll give them a set project fee, and then that's the end of that. If it's where there's a lot of work, or I've got to go to court and testify, I've got to research things, then I typically will do it hourly because it's much more involved and it can take hours and hours. I just finished one case that it should have very easily have been a $1,500 bill. It ended up being almost $8,000 because it ended up involving business valuations and property valuations and going to court for multiple days. So it just depends on the level. I've done cases for, it takes me 2 hours or a couple hours, it's $600, and someone ends up getting more alimony than they thought it was possible. So it's simple. So it really depends, and like Jackie said earlier, it doesn't matter how much money you have. However much you have is very important to you.
Yes.
So you want to make sure that you're getting what you should be getting.
Yes, and for each of you, what about the implementation? Once you're finished, assets need to be retitled or whatever. Who takes care of that? Is that a lawyer's or is that the CFP?
Actually, it's a combination of
Yeah,
it. If I'm involved, or again, they decide to work with me, I'll help them retitle the assets. So if they're consolidating, we'll retitle. There may need to be quadros drafted if it's a pension plan. We may need to provide a copy of the court document that says that divorce is final and they get XYZ assets or an IRA in order to split things. So it's really not going to happen until after everything's filed with the court. If it's a retirement plan, they'll draft a quadro.
Quadro.
Qualified domestic relations order.
Sorry.
When you transfer a pension or a retirement asset, there's a tax ramification. So in order to avoid that, legally the IRS demands that we have this qualified domestic relations order, which basically says to the IRS, this is a divorce, we want you to transfer the asset. And Paul's right, it doesn't happen before the divorce. Sometimes it takes months and months to get those quadros implemented. And it's not because of the lawyers and it's not because of the court, it's because of the plan administrator, because every company or every plan administrator have different requirements of what has to be in that quadro. Then the lawyers have to look at it, then it has to be approved by, go back to the attorney who's drafting it, then it has to be approved by the court. So it takes signed by the judge. It takes a lot of time.
And there's some follow-up. I actually had one in 2008 when the market was dropping like a rock. That took 9 months. The woman lost almost $90,000
Oh, dear Lord.
because the company didn't follow through when as soon as administratively possible, and we had to fight. We got the lady back the $90,000 because we actually went back and showed them we had submitted it. It was in good order. So you have to follow up on it. And that's usually my job again if they're a client. So.
And what about assets when it comes to those that might be, what do they say, hidden? As forensics are required. Is that something, obviously that's not a mediated situation because
you don't want mediation.
Causing trouble.
That shouldn't
Is
be
that something
mediation.
that lawyers are dealing with or you're dealing with or cooperatively or how does that work?
There are a lot of places you can find where people are hiding assets. Again, I'm not a
Cayman
forensic.
Islands.
I'm not a forensic accountant, but tax return is a great place to hide them.
I always start with that.
Yeah, tax return, bank statements,
W-2s.
account statements. Yeah, there's lots of places to look to see what's been going on, money movement. So that's usually the first thing I look for. The other thing is if they own a business, if they have QuickBooks reports. I mean, you can see money going in and out that doesn't look like it's a business expense. So again, that's part of my job too, and it depends if it's a contested situation versus mediation. Mediation, the parties typically trust each other, and they're going to work together to get it done.
And that's one of the requirements that the mediator will set out at the beginning is you can't hide assets. Everything has to be on the table.
Well,
That's
more
what's supposed to be.
importantly, it's mandated by the court.
Right.
Because you have an obligation to disclose all your assets. If your court not disclosing an asset, you're going to have a really angry judge, and you're going to risk losing it all. I had that happen to me in a case in Massachusetts, and the judge said either you bring the money back in a month or you're going to jail.
And the lawyer who drafts the property settlement agreement usually will put a clause in that says any undisclosed assets that are found
Yeah.
after the divorce, they could say they're divided 50-50. They could say it all goes to the other spouse, depending on how drastic they want to be with that clause.
Yeah, what people have to realize is that when David or Jackie aren't acting as mediators, or when they are, they're not an advocate for either client. And usually what happens afterwards is the client will take the agreement that they draw up and go to their own attorney. And as David mentions, they'll question, is this fair or not fair? Usually we get the client to that stage and there's been no disagreements, especially when I'm involved. We've disclosed everything, we've had lengthy discussions about it. Sometimes that's kind of where the process gets gummed up, is when the attorney becomes, their own attorney becomes their advocate. And that sometimes will take, they have the best intentions, they do go through mediation. I've still seen people spend $10,000, $15,000 because then when the advocate gets involved, they kind of
Derails.
upset the apple cart a little bit.
Lawyers are used to fighting for everything
Yeah.
that you're entitled to. Mediation doesn't always provide that result. So there's still a little bit of a little throwback when you get to that
Well,
point in
what
time.
David said is true. When we're mediators, we're not attorneys. And we
Yes.
have to keep reminding the client of that.
And
We
this
are
is a
not
good time for
attorneys.
you to
We're here as
remind them.
certified
Yes.
mediators.
Right.
Now, when we've talked about family law in the past with our attorneys, we've asked them about them representing themselves if someone wants to do it yourself as in court. There are websites that you can turn to get information about what forms that need to be filed. Comment if you would, and I would imagine that I know where this is going, comment if you would
Pro ses.
about how someone does pro se or takes care of their own do-it-yourself financial planning online.
There's calculators and QuickBooks and money and magazines all over. There's tons of things on the internet. The thing is if you don't know, if it's not your job and you don't know what to look for, you're going to miss things. And it's impossible to keep up. There's no way I could do what I do and be a lawyer and be a CPA. It's impossible to keep up on all the intricacies, all the changing rules and regulations, the laws, the code, everything. I tell people to do what they do best, do their job, and leave this stuff up to the experts, because it can be detrimental. It can cost you tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars in the long run. It's worth it to get someone's perspective. They wouldn't go perform brain surgery on themselves, so I wouldn't do either law or finance on themselves either.
Jackie and I tell the clients the same thing about the surgery.
Do you?
We
do that all the time.
And we didn't rehearse that.
We do that all the time.
And I guess this is a good time to add that because I was doing this research, and as I have for family law when we were handling it with lawyers, there are many websites. There are Smart Divorce, there are those forms to
It's
fill
like the
out.
medical websites, too.
Yeah.
And it's very,
WebMD.
yes, and it's very interesting that all of those sites, while they say even if you have an uncontested divorce, you may be able to use these things, but we caution and we recommend that you hire a lawyer anyway. Many of them do say that, so I'm sure that there's good reason for that, especially as you're bringing out the
Yeah,
complexities.
and as Jackie mentioned, there's a form that everybody has to fill out when they file their divorce, the DR6. And you'd be surprised at people who don't know how much their mortgages are, they don't know how much their bills are, their credit card balances, their monthly expenses. If you can't figure that out, there's no way you're going to represent.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've seen people sit in court and they can't figure out how much they should be putting on the forms. So how can you get proper child support or alimony if you
Good
don't even know
point.
what those bills are?
Good point. It's very helpful to have this information, Paul. We really appreciate your insights. Jackie and David, we always appreciate yours. It's helpful to know the big picture in many of those issues. Please stay tuned. Our discussions of legal matters will continue.